I have the pleasure to introduce you tonight to two women who will be able to take tremendous credit when we finally succeed in ending chimpanzee research in the United States. The program is set up because the chimpanzees that Nancy came to know in the nursery and at LEMSIP are some of the same chimpanzees that are now in sanctuary. So between the two of them, we hear the bad news and we hear the good news. And we hear about them as individuals and we come to know and love them. So I'm going to start by telling you what made me fall in love with these two women. When I met Nancy, she had co-founded a group called the Laboratory Primate Advocacy Group, which is specifically a group for current and former animal caregivers in research labs and I guess other facilities as well. But and what they're trying to do is reach out to individuals like Nancy who are there trying to do something and trying to help them find a voice so that they can do more. And when I met Nancy, I said to her, well, two things happened. One, it was the first night I had literally good night's sleep thinking that there are people in the labs who do care as much as you do, Theo. Hard as that is to believe, there are some. And Nancy was one of my first individuals like that I met. And I said to her, Nancy, how do you stay? And she said, how can I leave when my friends can't? So that's Nancy Megna, who's here on the left. And Gloria I met at a conference in Boston, and her warmth and energy was just infectious. And as I came to know her too, there's always sort of these things that people tell you that become metaphors for who they are. I asked her one time, I said, Gloria, is there anything we can help with at Fauna? And she said that she was working on one project where they were putting in huge glass windows, chimpanzee-proof windows, windows that you could drive a Hummer through and they would just go blah, but stay there. And I thought, windows? And she said, yes. She said, I want them to be able to see their world without bars. So let me introduce Nancy and Gloria, and don't worry about the time. I'll let you know when to start Q&A, okay?
Thank you. Thank you. And good evening. I should never watch these kinds of things before we have to talk. So, anyway, we are here for that exact reason, is to just share our stories that really are the stories of the chimpanzees that have come out of the laboratory system and are now in sanctuary, and also, more importantly too, on behalf of those that didn't make it out, some friends of mine even that are scattered throughout the country and we have no information on them or no light at the end of the tunnel for them, at least at this point. And that's why we are compelled to work with this project and with Neves and to try to work on getting the rest of chimpanzees out while there may still be time. Because many of them who have been caught in the wild or born into research, regardless, it takes time for them to recover, and they need time to recover at their own rate, and they cannot recover while still being in a laboratory. And many of them have now physical risks from years of being in research, as well as the psychological trauma. So we feel that they deserve the chance to spend their last days, however many there are. It still matters whether it's one or years, in sanctuary. So, as Theo said, I did start out working in LEMSIP, NYU's laboratory. I was never comfortable for a moment with the idea of biomedical research and animals being used, much, and not just primates and things, but it was in the area where I lived in New York, and I dismissed it, as a place I would never go near. And then there was an article done in the local paper, and I felt compelled to go and try to check it out and see what was going on there. And actually, they did at the time have a volunteer program, and you could come for the day. And it was at that point that I met the chimpanzees and monkeys, and particularly the babies in the nursery, baby chimpanzees, and I just, that's what started it all. And I just ended up having to come back and volunteer because they just moved me so, and I just saw that they needed so much beyond what a scant workforce could provide, and the conditions were so stark that I just felt like I needed to come and do what I could do, and there was a moral struggle with that I did seek help through the Jane Goodall Institute, on whether I should do this, and they had encouraged me 2 times during 10 years to go back in, and she said, Jane Goodall looked at me one time, and I said, I just can't do this anymore, at a book signing, and she looked up at me and she just said, those chimps need friends, and so I just went back in for a few more years, and anyway, there comes a time when, you really have to leave, because it's just not right, it's just horrible, and so you do the best you can. And also the importance of being in there as a person who is going to try to fight the uphill battle or make things better or raise issues, too, is that you try to influence anybody that is in there. And sometimes that can work, and so we do need people on the inside, as I say, as much as we need activists on the outside, because, without knowing what's going on in there, or without single little people in pockets that are a minority saying, no, wait a minute, this isn't right, or finding a way to, get around things, or to get the word out. It's just important to do. So I just wanted to assure people that it's not something that I was okay with. It did change my life, and it I don't know if I'll ever get over it, but that's what is compelling me to not get over it and to continue to share some information and these stories with people who wouldn't have any clue of what's going on, business as usual behind closed doors. So we want to talk a little bit tonight about some of the individuals that are close to our hearts.
Well, before we do that, I just have to say, as an animal rights activist, I personally hated anyone who could do anything horrible to any animal in a laboratory. I hated Nancy before I even met her. I hated everyone in the lab before I even met them. I was more surprised than anyone to realize that I couldn't hate some of these people that were doing what they were doing. I remember the very first time I drove to Lemsep, I was one of there's not a lot of people that actually start sanctuaries that actually get to meet the chimpanzees in the laboratory. First of all, you're not usually allowed to go into the laboratories and meet them. I had seen Dr. James Mahoney on videos before I even met James Mahoney, and I thought, this is the most disgusting man in the entire world. How could he do this to chimpanzees? I also didn't realize what they were doing to chimpanzees. We drove through the night, through a wicked snowstorm, to actually be at Lemsep for 9 o'clock in the morning to be allowed to go into the laboratory. Dr. Mahoney had to meet me. He had to meet my partner, who's a veterinarian, and he had to meet the person who was driving the snowstorm, who happened to be what you'd call a redneck cowboy type person, which is the typical type of person that they normally hire to work with chimpanzees. As we drove up to this place that was hidden away in the woods of New York State, my heart was pounding and I felt almost nauseous. I was, nervous and worried and stressed, and for so many reasons. First of all, I knew that I had to convince this horrible man that I was the right person to send the chimps to, that I would do the best I could to provide a home for certain individuals. And I also had to face and see what was going on in the laboratory. And as Nancy's described many times before, what it was like, driving up to Lemsep. I mean, there's the gates, and there's an alarm that goes off, and there's these long trailer units. Usually you do this part, describing what it looks like, but they look like trailers. There's no windows, there's doors at each end. They're long, narrow units. The cages are hung from the ceiling in each unit. you have access to all sides of the cage, so people could go everywhere. You could, if there were 4 people trying to approach a chimpanzee with a needle, you could get him from any side. You can get him from the back, from the side, from the front, from underneath. They had nowhere to go. That part we'll get to. We've seen images of what the cages look like, but that was the reality. I'd seen images of that type of thing before. I'd seen what that was going to look like, and I knew it was going to be awful. And the gates opened, and the buzzer went off, and there was a call for Dr. Mahoney to come out, and the next thing you know, this lovely little Irishman is standing in front of me with these eyes that, as painful as it was to look into the eyes of the chimpanzees, it was equally painful looking into his eyes at that moment. All of a sudden, you know, on the videos and on the programs I'd seen him on, he looked so big and he looked so mean and he looked so scary. He was a veterinarian, though. He wasn't a researcher. And I'd kind of forgotten that for a moment, that he was there to look after the damage and to take care of the wounded victims of research. Why he chose to do it, you know, I mean, he has his reasons, like Nancy had reasons for choosing to work with chimpanzees. But all of a sudden, I couldn't hate him anymore. There was just that little moment, that little flash where I looked into his eyes and I felt like he was a desperate man looking for places for his, what he considered his family, the chimpanzees that lived in his laboratory. He was desperately seeking homes for them. Enough said about James Mahoney. Obviously the chimps did get to come and live with us. We did a really good sales pitch that day. It was the Irish redneck cowboy person that he thought was the one that was going to do it. He thought, there's a veterinarian there, he's going to be good too, but this one, she's going to be a real pain in the ass because she's just a bleeding heart and she's an animal rights activist. But I tried to hide that as much as I possibly could in front of him. I really did, and I mean, I drank a lot of beer with that man. I listened to a lot of stories, and I learned a lot about the chimpanzees that lived there and the things that had happened to them, and that's why I have personal stories about the chimps. Unfortunately, my stories don't really amount to very much because they're what he told me. The stories that really amount to a lot are from the people that worked inside. And I met, of course, while we were there, all the people that worked there. And walking through there and being dressed up and suited up and prepared to enter units and meet chimpanzees was quite an unusual experience, believe me. But there were some of the warmest people really there, and then there were the real macho, horrible, typical type of people you imagine that work in laboratories. And Nancy knows many of them personally, and again, that's part of the reason why she had to fight so hard to change so many things. But you know, it's part of the job. And I never actually got to meet Nancy there. But later on, when the chimps had moved into our sanctuary, a lot of folks wanted to come and meet the chimps, or not meet them, but come and see them in their new life. People were crying and hugging me and thanking me for taking. We took only 15 chimpanzees. I mean, if I'd known what I know now, I would have, you know, clearly taken many, 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 many more. I mean, I would have just packed them all in and I would have done something, but, you know, it's too late now. One day I received a video in the mail, and it was from Nancy. And the chimps had already moved in by now. And we have televisions in the chimp house, you know, that the chimps can watch, and they had VCRs and so on. I mean, it's truly difficult to entertain and find things for captive chimpanzees to do each day, each minute. Their life will never, ever be what it should be. It said, there was this lovely note from Nancy, and I thought, and she said, you know, this is for personal use only. This is just to give you an idea of what it was like. She understood how important it was for us to know a little bit about the histories of our new chimpanzee family. We were having great difficulties in the beginning with the adjustment. We'd automatically assume that once the chimps would leave the laboratory, that going to a sanctuary and going to what you'd consider a better environment, they'd be happy. Well, there was something wrong. It wasn't working out that way. I mean, our older residents definitely did extremely well in the transition. The younger folks, the ones that Nancy raised, Jethro, Regis, Binky, Petra, Chance, even Rachel, they were born in the laboratory. Nancy was their mom. They were taken from their true chimpanzee mothers. Nancy cradled them in her arms, she rocked them, she hugged them, she loved them, she nurtured them, she raised them. And so what I got to see in this video, and I actually put the video in the chimp house, and to this day I have not shown this video again to the chimpanzees because of the reaction they had on that day. I mean, I reacted to it personally too. First of all, it was, you know, the lab noises, it was the banging of the bars, it was people wearing the Tyvek suits and the masks and the goggles, but there were voices, and some of the guys at LEMSIP were extremely loud. Some of the units had radios blaring where you couldn't, you know, they blasted the radios so they wouldn't have to listen to the banging of the bars. Some of them spoke horribly to the chimpanzees, and then others were sweet and loving and nurturing to the chimpanzees. So you really had quite a combination of types of people that were working there. I put the video on, and everyone came to the front of the chimp house, and they have access. They can all come and they can look through the bars, of course, at the television, and they heard the LEMSIP noises. They heard the bars rattling. Then they started to scream. The chimps all started screaming, and they started running, hugging each other. In fear. I knew it now. I mean, I didn't know them very well in the beginning, and I didn't understand everything that they were doing. It was a whole new language I had to learn. And they were terrified. And then it was so bizarre because they'd run up to the bars and they'd look at the television, then they'd run away and they'd go back again because they wanted to see what was going on. And then all of a sudden there was this voice, and it was a woman's voice, and it was a woman saying, "Good morning, hi honeybee, and good morning Dora, and come over honey," and all these wonderful endearing things. And it was Nancy's voice. All of a sudden everyone came to the front and they sat there and they just stopped, dead silence, watched the video, listened, looked around. They were looking like, where is she? Where is she? Jethro, Regis, Binky, they screamed and they hugged each other, this time now with, "Oh my God, oh my God, it's her, it's her." That was kind of my moment where I thought, oh my God, they have to see her again. I mean, it was pretty obvious that this woman had played a very important role in their lives. And I guess that's why when we were in LA, we did a talk in LA, and we were all really worried. It was an animal rights conference, and people started to attack Nancy. They asked her how and why she could do what she did. And she's pretty much explained, you know, how and why she got there, and what she did, and what she had to go through, and how hard and difficult it was for her to endure it. But Nancy had an answer for this woman who was attacking her. And I don't know if you're able to do that again, but can you remember what you said? How you told her that if she could do it?
Yeah, well, look, that, I mean, because I understand it's a good question, you know, like if you really care. I mean, I have my own sister-in-law asked me that in the beginning. I thought you liked animals. What are you doing? And so I quickly stopped talking about my job for 10 years. And, you know, I did say that if anybody else could stand there for just one day and do it, I'm sure that it would stop. The public is quite protected and insulated, not really their own fault. It's a very secretive kind of business, but you don't really know or get to see, and it's like the package of meat at the grocery store. If you don't really see where it's come from, then it's a lot easier to eat. And so I said, I'm standing there on behalf of my fellow humans, the public, the taxpayers, apologizing to these wonderful beings every day. I'm sorry, and for what? People don't realize what it's like for them, and so only because I somehow came to know what it was like, I feel a sense of responsibility. And I mean, I was on the Jane Goodall track. I just saw myself running off and doing some wonderful, great studies in Africa and helping with conservation. I didn't want this job. I didn't want and I feel a sense of responsibility even today as my chimp family is spread throughout the country. Fortunately, some are in sanctuary, but I feel even a financial responsibility and even though I don't make a lot of money, and yet there are many of the Lemsip chimps that didn't get out there, and they're scattered through New Iberia, Alamogordo. I don't know anything about them. It's like losing a relative. I can't even send anything to them. What could I even do? Give money so that there can be more research done? I can't visit. I can't get their condition. How are they doing? Who are they with? Are they alone? So I do want to let people know that it's hard to stand there in front of a cage and be the gatekeeper and witness this every day. But I always said that their need was greater than my pain. Their need was greater than my pain. And that's what kept me, going to work, because they had no voice. They had no way of letting you know what's going on. So that's why if we get everybody, on board with this project and this campaign, and just talking to your friends, relatives, go back to that sister-in-law of mine and explain. You do it. You go. You touch their hands and their eyes. You hold them as they're thrashing about, hallucinating, coming out. You do it. And then you tell me where we go from here.
You know where we'll go from here? We'll go to Rachel, because you were there when someone actually could not have a child, a woman named Sherry Gray from Florida. So she thought she should buy a baby chimpanzee and raise a baby chimpanzee to be her child. And we all know that this is not a new idea or a new concept. This has been going on for a very long time. There's one thing for a chimpanzee to be born in the laboratory. There's another thing for a chimpanzee to be caught in Africa and brought to a laboratory and put into research. And then there's something else for a chimpanzee to be bought by a person raising that little child, little chimpanzee child, as a human child, wearing clothes. This Rachel actually had a nanny, lived in Florida, slept in a cradle, ate in a high chair, used utensils, had jewelry, had toys, had a bath every night, had a great little life for a human child. Certainly not a great life for a chimpanzee child. Then this stupid woman thought it would be a great idea to get a little brother for Rachel. And that didn't work out. So now she had two chimpanzees. Rachel, at 3.5 years old, was sold to Lemsip. And we just found out today, because Nancy actually spoke to the person who was there the day Rachel arrived at Lemsip, and we didn't know that there was such a value put on her head. Normally chimpanzees are given to biomedical research after their time in entertainment or after their time in a home where they've trashed the home or sold for a minimal amount of money. So you need to talk about Rachel now.
Yeah, I do. Rachel was walked into the laboratory with her pseudo-parents, and yeah, she was about
3.5.
3.5 it was. Oh, he thought she was even a little bit older. And they were paid $7,000 to dump her into research without her little baby brother. And the husband and wife came, and the woman was hysterical and sobbing and breaking down, and yeah, that was a tough day for her. But what did it do to Rachel? Because, I mean, how do you take this little human-like baby, separate her from her human parents, her pretend brother? He wasn't there. We don't even know where he is right now, and that'll be one of our projects too in R&R, to find him too. But so she was separated from everything and everyone she knew during her critical infancy years. That where in the wild, of course, you'd still be with your mom riding on her back. And she was put into a 32-inch monkey cage, and so that would be about the width of this table, you know, and which a lot of the young chimpanzees were housed illegally at LEMSIP. That was one of the rough things about LEMSIP, and not having indoor-outdoor access was that the cage space violations were really rough. And she was put into a cage, and she became hysterical, and they left, and that was it. No visitation, which I don't know what would have been worse. So my friend who was working there in the evenings at the time, he would try to help her through it, because of course she proceeded to have a breakdown. She wouldn't eat. They were trying everything from oatmeal to treats to she just was completely beside herself. And she wasn't with another chimpanzee at the time. She didn't know them. They didn't know how that would go, or if she'd get hurt, or if she'd hurt them. And he was told, don't take her out. Probably because you wouldn't get her back in or something. Just don't take her out. So, of course, he didn't listen to that. And again, that's what we count on people in laboratories, including Dr. Mahoney, who said, screw the rules for a lot of things, just to try to make things better. But again, it's the structure of the business that prevents you from really fixing the problem. They're just Band-Aids, little things. So he would take her out in the evening and let her run around the nursery a little bit. And because again, don't forget, she's still thinking she's a human. But he said, she just wasn't doing well, and she quickly started to hurt herself. She would have screaming fits and go into psychotic states of a breakdown and bite her wrists. And so I didn't know that she never got to be with a partner in the nursery at all, and that they kept her in the nursery to try to protect her from going over to the work side for as long as possible. But again, it's a Band-Aid, because she was just alone and mixed up. And supposedly they had promised these people that, well, she won't go into research. She'll go into the breeding units. So at least she'll escape some of the hepatitis and things like that. But she was in no mental state to be able to become a quote-unquote, prospect breeder. So, she couldn't relate. She couldn't handle anything. She was a mess. And so she went over to the big side. And I think supposedly at one point, since they were sort of breaking their contract with these owners, that she was about to go into research, that either, well, you can get her back or take her, or she's going to have to go into projects because she's not going to work as a breeder. And then she went into one project in particular was for artificial sweetener, I think NutraSweet or something, and again, something so important, where she'd be knocked down, anesthetized, all day, just most of the day. And boy, let me tell you, there were a few times when I've seen chimps after that, and it's horrible. It just wipes them out. And so that would go on sporadically over months. They'd come for a couple days and come back, and take 2 chimps at a time or something, and knock them down all day. And so by the time I came to LEMSIP and came to meet Rachel, it was one afternoon, and I was on the adult side, the big side, and she was living alone in a cage, and I just heard screaming, and the day was sort of ending, and I didn't know why somebody was screaming when there should be no more medical procedures or no more knockdowns. And so I said, who's screaming? And so I went in and I saw her, and she was just in a state, screaming, almost like she was inconsolable. She really wasn't even aware of your presence for part of that time, and she was just harming her, just rubbing and rubbing and rubbing. Just these are stereotypical kind of institutionalized kind of behaviors, and just over and over and screaming, and her chin was raw. And so we've got to help her, because I didn't know her yet. And so I run and got treats for her. We ran and got different things for her to do. Then we ran and got a television and put it right in front of her, and just trying to calm her down. And then I came to know she was already on a medication for anxiety. And my heart went out to her, because she was just lost. And at that time, I didn't even know her story, of where she had come from. And it's no wonder, how do you go from one extreme to the other?
Well, and just to add in there about the knockdowns and so on, we've counted and calculated how many times each from the medical files. We've done the best we can, even though there's many pages and many years and many months missing. In Rachel's situation, between the age of 4 and 9, she had over 235 knockdowns. Now that's a little 4-year-old girl, 4 years old, and a 4-year-old chimpanzee is about the size, maybe a little taller than a 4-year-old human child, weighing about the same. And over half of those were by dart gun. So now you have this pistol with this 4-inch dart entering the body of this little child. This is a little child. This is a chimpanzee child who's already suffering, and we wonder why she was screaming and why she was self-mutilating. It's written in her files that her face was rubbed raw, and yes, they were medicating her and doing the best they could for her, at least the people that were trying to console her each day. The really, 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 really sad part, I wish at this point there was a happy ending for this particular story, this particular person, chimpanzee person, but Rachel did really, really well when she first moved into Fauna. But I've seen her slip back in the last 2.5 years at least. And actually, that's part of the reason why now we're seriously consulting. Dr. Capaldo is helping us. She's actually putting an advertisement in her, I guess is it the Neves magazine, or is it the yes, we're looking for a human psychiatrist to help help her, because she's not stopping. She responded initially extremely well to her new life, getting blankets back, making a bed at night. She loves to eat human food. She loves it when we make oatmeal for her. She loves it when we make mashed potatoes. She loves it when we give her hot tea, but it's not really quite enough. It isn't enough, and we're not sure, if there's really, psychiatrists can probably help us figure out whether. I've seriously resisted trying to give her medication over all these years, thinking that her lifestyle and maybe companions and maybe, different things and different areas and things that she likes. She still drags a tire around with her, for God's sakes. Like, she has this security blanket with her, and it's a tire, something that she would have had in the cage in the laboratory. She doesn't cross into any new area without that tire. I mean, for the first year, she dragged that thing everywhere she went with her. Annie Chimpanzee, the matriarch of Fauna, who's no longer with us, was the chimpanzee and the chimpanzee person who actually probably saved Rachel's life initially. Dr. Mahoney actually put Rachel in the cage with Annie in the laboratory, and that was the beginning of Rachel's healing process. Annie was such a mother figure, and Annie helped Rachel in her early years at Fauna in the transition. Then Annie passed away, and that set everyone back. Almost between setting the humans back and setting the chimpanzees back, that death was definitely the hardest death that hit Fauna. It happened to be 3 months after we lost Pablo, so it was just 2 in a row, and it was too much for us, too much for them. And obviously Rachel things started to happen. She didn't have Annie there anymore to protect her. She didn't have the mother figure she needed. She was living with a group of, we jokingly called the kids from the lab, the New York hoodlums, because they were just kind of, imagine you have 3 teenage girls and 3 preteen boys. Good God, what on earth? All raising one another with one adult female in there to help manage this group. This would never ever happen in the wild, and this should never have happened at Fauna. We were told to keep the infected chimps away from the non-infected chimpanzees. Annie one day decided that was going to change. Annie one day decided she wasn't going to leave this bloody room that I'd locked her in, and she had 3 doors she could leave. And she chose on that day to go onto the other side of the building where 7 adult chimpanzees lived who were all HIV positive, and we'd been told, oh, don't mix them together because they're going to give each other the disease. Annie clearly hadn't read the rules, and on this particular day, and this is where I now listen to chimpanzees when they decide they want to do something. I don't listen to the stupid humans that tell me not to do these things with them anymore. She knew on that day, she'd waited and made her mind up. She'd stayed in that room for at least 3 days and wouldn't leave it, and it's pretty rare that a chimp decides to lock him or his or herself in a room, and she was not leaving. And I jokingly, or sort of pretended I was going to open the lock on the door that would lead into the other part of the building where she would actually be confronted with this whole group of other chimpanzees that she'd lived beside but never lived with. And nobody does that. That's like breaking all chimp rules, like opening a door and letting a chimpanzee go in with 7 other chimpanzees. It's like you're not allowed to do that type of thing, or at least I believed that for the first 2 years. I'll regret it till the day I die, that I listened and didn't listen and understand what they were asking for. Sometimes chimpanzees are banging bars between one another, not because they want to kill the person on the other side. They just want those bars to be gone, and they just want to be on the other side. They just want to be there to hug that person. And chimpanzees fall in love with each other from across the room, or just in that just by communicating with each other, and they become attached and to someone that lives beside them, and that's part of lab life. You live beside someone for a while, and then that individual gets moved to another unit, and I think they did that on purpose a lot of times, so the chimpanzees didn't get attached to one another, so that there wouldn't be such a breakdown when that individual would be moved to another room, so that they wouldn't go into a depression or stop eating. So they did this on a regular basis. You could see it in the files. Move to unit number whatever. Taking them away from their familiar caregivers, so that they don't get attached to caregivers either. Don't get attached to the chimps living near you. Don't get attached. You have no possibility of having anything close to a normal life. Back to Annie. Went to open the lock, and I said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And if you met Annie and you spent any time with this person, you would say she was smarter than any of the humans that were working with her, certainly smarter than I was. She could have, raised a family in Africa, traveled 30 kilometers per day, had looked after a tribe, a whole family, a whole group. She would have had grandchildren, sons, daughters. Her whole family would have surrounded her, as Flo in Africa did. So she's a pretty smart cookie. Don't sit her down next to a kid in front of a computer and say, is she smarter than the kid in front of the computer? Because it isn't going to work. Take the kid and put him in Africa and see if the kid can survive and look after a family in Africa, and you'll see that you can't compare the type of intelligence that they have. Annie was clearly indicating on that day that there was no doubt in her mind that she was going on that side. And in fact, as I started to get the lock out, I started to lift the door, and she was stronger than, she probably had the strength of maybe 6 men, except that day she grabbed me and it nearly gave me a concussion, and I would say she had the strength of at least 12 because it felt like I was hit by a Mack truck. But so she was a good, strong girl. She could have easily closed the door as I started to open it. There was no question there, and the others were all staying off in the distance. It was almost as though they were thinking, you're not really going to do this. It was obvious they were sort of concerned. And Donna Ray was one of the adult females that lived on the other side of the building that always, I thought, hated Annie. I really did. I thought, she was always yelling at her, or always screaming, or always banging whenever Annie went by. And and anytime Annie was having problems with the rest of the group, Donna Ray seemed to be so furious and angry all the time. So I was really concerned for Annie, that if she went into that side of the building with Donna Ray over there, she had Donna Ray, Sue Ellen, Pepper, Billy Joe, Pablo, Yoko. This was a pretty dynamic group of adult chimpanzees. And she was a pretty frail older lady. And she barreled in there like she'd lived there her whole life. She was determined, and she had, we have play areas that kind of resemble a gymnasium, I guess, in the size of them. She had 20 feet to walk straight ahead. Donna Ray was on the opposite side. She had 20 feet to walk straight ahead, and then they had to walk 20 feet, and they would have to meet in the middle. And that's pretty much exactly what they did. And together, they started the walk. Annie walked down one side, Donna Ray walked down the other, and I was alone in the chimp house that day because no one would ever agree or allow me to do this, because the humans would say, Gloria, that's the stupidest thing you've ever done in your entire life. But it wasn't my decision. It was Annie's decision. Of course, I was worried and concerned that Annie and Donna Ray would break into a fight and kill each other, but I thought, well, Annie seems to know what she's doing. I mean, it was pretty clear she did seem to know what she was doing. Well, they met at the back, at the center, and they hugged, and they hugged, and they hugged, and they screamed, and they hugged again, and they embraced, and Donna Ray walked beside Annie like this for honestly 2 full weeks. They were inseparable. It was as though I'd reunited 2 dear old friends, and together they were, a force to be reckoned with. And they even, which is really unique and rare, chimpanzees normally don't share their beds with other chimpanzees unless it's a mom and a baby. We ended up calling this wonderful mass of blankets off in the corner the princess bed. It was a bed created with layers and layers and layers of blankets. I think we counted 35 in one nest, because they come from everywhere. And wonderful chimpanzee women will share a bed. You get to sleep in it first, and then when I get up, you can lay in it next, and then later on in the day, you can lay in it. So Annie always started the day in it. Donna Ray used to hate getting up in the morning, and she'd always sleep with her blankets over her head, and you'd see this little face just peeking out. And then Sue Ellen would get to use it later on in the day, and Pepper would get to use it later on that day. There was an order. Well, Donna Ray passed away this March, and that, again, was another tragic and deeply disturbing time for Rachel. I didn't know how close Rachel had become to Donneray, but I should have known. I should have known that all of them would react that way. And what Rachel did on the day of Donneray's death, there's something that I had decided to do after hearing different stories about life in the lab and sort of wondering what would ever happen if someone did die. What would we do? You know, what it must have been like in the laboratory. And this was from hearing stories from Nancy and hearing stories from Dr. Mahoney. When chimpanzees would be moved from one unit to the next, often they didn't know, well, the other chimpanzees clearly didn't know where they were going. The humans knew where they were going. Sometimes, if you were lucky, you could hear that chimpanzee screaming or making vocalizations from another unit, so you'd know that your friend was somewhere on the property. And sometimes they'd be dead and gone. I just found out this week myself what they did with the dead bodies at Lemsip, and that was pretty hard to hear. Nancy will tell you about that. But we had decided that if one of the chimpanzees were to die, we would let the others see the body and actually touch the body. Now, this was very controversial also, not something you're supposed to do. But after witnessing the first death and watching how all the chimps reacted when Pablo died, and then watching each chimpanzee go into the room and deal with his dead body, and I say deal with because I mean I think we all deal with death differently, the same way chimpanzees all deal with death differently. Some were able to go in, like Donneray and Annie went in with Pablo and tried to wake him up, tried to nudge him and try to play with him to see if he was all right. Donneray poured water in his ear, you know, kind of with a bottle of water, just playfully, but kind of like seriously, seeing if he was going to respond. Yoko couldn't go in the room at all. Yoko, who was so close to Pablo, he just couldn't do it. He paced back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, didn't know what to do. Tom went in the room, and Tom was extremely close to Pablo, and Tom just examined his whole body, and he just let out a scream, and he hit the wall so hard and let out another call that was just like, I can't believe you're dead, or I can't believe this has happened, and he left. It was simple as that. When Donneray passed away, the young boys shocked me and surprised me. Jethro, Regis, and Binky were whimpering and walking around her body, and not knowing what to do, sitting on the steps beside her and not knowing how to deal with it. I really didn't expect them to do that because they didn't seem to be very close to her, but clearly they were. Binky acts exactly like a young child who wouldn't know what to do if his mom or an aunt or a relative died. And Binky actually dragged her and flipped her over. And so, you know, that was hard for everyone to watch, but it's a reality. I mean, a young child would probably bang on his mom to wake her up, or bang on someone who was dead, just wake up, wake up, wake up. That's all he was trying to do. But as he flipped her over, her mouth got cut, so blood started to come out of her mouth. And Rachel, shortly after, went into the room, and the chimpanzees that live with us are always provided with, you know, bowls of water and cleaning supplies because they watch us clean all the time. That's one of the things they've learned to do really, 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 really well. You know, they clean a room better than I clean a room, I swear to God. I mean, they pick things up and they scrub and do things like that. And they often have paper towels and face cloths and, you know, soapy bowls of water. Well, at least 7 of us stood there watching Rachel just wipe and clean Donneray's face of all the blood. When we took Donneray's body out of the room, there wasn't a little bit of blood left on her face. Rachel lay there for over 15 minutes, just cleaning her face up with this paper towel, with such love and a love and a dignity and a respect that you would pay someone that you care about and you love. And I guess that's talking about the deaths at Fauna is hard because it's, I don't want anyone to think that, you go into sanctuary and you die, but I mean, sadly, for anyone who's been infected, any of the chimpanzees that have been infected or have endured an awful lot of biomedical research, they're simply ruined inside, and it is a hospice for them. And the only way I can sort of get around that is to say that at least they're dying with people who care and love them, and a chimpanzee family that totally loves them, so with dignity and respect, which I'll fight to the end to say that I don't believe that that happens in laboratories. I don't believe that that's an opportunity you're given. Some zoos now, I do believe, are adopting the policy of letting the others see the dead body. So Rachel is now going to be, we're going to work on fixing and helping Rachel. Psychiatrists have actually called Dr. Capaldo and told her that they would be willing to help us figure something out for her. She may live the rest of her life like this, hurting herself and angry all the time. And if there's something like a happy pill for her, I mean, I hate to say it, I don't mean it that way, if it sounds like not the right way to say it, but she needs additional help, and we would do it for someone we love. We would try and get them that type of help. We could send her to a therapist every single day of her life if that was possible. I've had telepathy people come in and do certain things with some of the chimps. But it's just, for Rachel, I don't think it's really quite enough. So she's someone we really have to work on and work for and work hard to try and help.
But I do want to say, because Gloria is so hard on herself and because we all want the best for them, but since I only get to go and visit periodically up in Canada at Fauna, for me, who has seen her at her worst, Rachel has made strides. And I saw her in August, and she just spent a lot of time outside, and she, she was present there, and she was happy and relaxed, and she has a relationship now with Toby, who came to Fauna from
New guy
from a zoo, who lost his companion, and she first described it as a dysfunctional relationship, but most of ours are, and
this is true.
So she has a significant other now, and to know that, so these are things that when I hear these stories, these are the kind of stories that help me to heal too. So they have this whole little thing going on, and they're there for each other, and they fit in a special way. So she is taking baby steps, again at her pace, and she really does suffer from PTSD and things, but she's there, and she's not accruing additional trauma and scars. She's given the opportunity to heal, and that's what we want for all of them.
Let's do a happy one then. Regis and Binky and Jethro, like how.
Well, they're perfect. They're just they're perfect.
How it was for them in the lab, being born in the laboratory, and what you saw and what I see now.
Yeah. The hoodlums that she refers to were in the nursery. Binky, Regis, Jethro, and Petra.
Only hoodlums because the others were the angels. So you have to have your two gangs.
Yes. But yeah, she said, we tried to protect them from research for as long as we could in the nursery until they were just 6, 7 years old, up to 8 years old, and just kind of busted out of the nursery, and we just really didn't want them to have to go to the big side and go to work for a living. One day that happened, and Jethro was sort of like the mini ambassador for the chimpanzee nursery, because he was just this gregarious little guy. And again, we're all different. We all have different personalities and different ways of handling the challenges of being taken from your mom and living in a monkey cage and just having a partner to cling to all the time, and a kid raising a kid with an occasional mom who's a human person who's got 30 to 40 chimpanzee babies to care for. And he was just this special kind of kid who just whose spirit wouldn't get crushed, and he just he was just there for his friends, and so the way it was constructed at LEMS, it began just trailers and things. There were no indoor outdoor runs or fancy tunnels to get people out and in. There were little tiny playrooms, and that you'd have to carry the chimpanzees in the nursery to the playrooms, and if they wouldn't willingly be carried back into their little tiny cages, then it was over for them. They couldn't come out anymore, ever. And so that was something that we really, prayed for every day, that they wouldn't come for each individual. And so Jethro was one that went over to the big side while he was still able to come out and play in baby pools. We'd, bring little baby swimming pools and let them fool around. And he'd only got out once a week at that time because there were too many big kids to try to juggle in these rooms. And he was just marvelous. And his partner was Dora, and she was just a nervous Nelly, little kind of fragile girl, and he just got her through it, and he just took care of her. And so even the big tough guys, humans at LEMSIP would and a very conservative veterinarian would just come and just be with Jethro and horse around, and he did backwards lovey hugs and just all kinds of wonderful, he was just kind to everyone that he met, chimpanzee or human. And so the day came when about 8 or 10 of these guys who were about 5 or 6 years old, they just were knocked down in the nursery and intravenously challenged with hepatitis C and loaded up in this cart kind of thing and taken over to what was called Junior Africa at LEMSIP, which was really a horrible, horrible area that, Jane Goodall didn't get to see. And it would be cages on one side, really just about 2 cages and small little corridor rooms, and a cinder block wall across from it, with barely about 6 feet between the cage and the wall. And so you could be next to somebody, and that was about it. And again, the cages weren't the proper size. And so now all of a sudden they'd wake up and their partner would be gone, most likely not even in the same room. The nursery was gone. We were gone. They heard all kinds of new big noises of big cage washers, and they couldn't see down the hall. They weren't going into playrooms anymore. There was much less enrichment truly going on. There weren't as many toys and things to do, and it was a whole new time for them that we had always dreaded. And Jethro, this gregarious kind of kid, couldn't handle it, and that was hard. So we'd go over, because there was never any transition or preparation, or just one day everything that they knew was gone. So we would feel compelled to go over and be with them and visit and bring them treats, and yet we still had a nursery full because they were still having babies. But we just felt like we had to do that, and it was a terrible kind of thing, because you'd be standing in front of the cages and just kind of trying to be happy and be upbeat and be there for them and really kind of make it better. But that it was an insult to their intelligence at the same time, because why should they be happy? They were frightened, and so it was hard to even know that even Jethro
couldn't handle it anymore, and he'd be whimpering and just swaying back and forth, and they got so little there, in terms of fruits and foods and treats and things that, we'd bring special things, but even his regular daily fruit would be laying in the bottom of the cage. He couldn't eat sometimes, and he just was lost, and he would be just doing this little crying, and you would try to comfort him, and he really couldn't even fix it anymore, and I couldn't even explain to him, and that wouldn't justify it, but there was just nothing that would alleviate his pain, and it was really hard to see and to watch that, and that was what happened to a lot of that group that went over. Binky, he was kind of a sweet but kind of a jock kind of guy in the nursery, very friendly and great, but I can handle it, and he'd be just off in the back of a cage, just bewildered, and he was next to his friend Honeybee, but he couldn't touch her anymore, and there we had to wear jumpsuits now because they were on a hepatitis study, and I just remember standing in front of his cage, just I needed him to be okay, because if he got worse, I couldn't fix him.